Hello, everyone, and welcome both the in-person TNARC and Jumpstart program and the remote TNARC program. We have around 30 online participants at the moment, and I'm seeing they are still trickling in. I see I'm also unmuted, so I think we are ready to go. I hope you had a really successful third week in Jumpstart, and I heard you had a review this morning, which went quite well. And I hope you had a great second week in TNARC as well. So we are going into the final week next week, and so I hope you all take this lecture today as an inspiration and to take a final push on this last weekend. So I'm going to start introducing both speakers today, who are dear colleagues and friends who are teaching here at UCLA for a long time, and who I'm very grateful that they will share their work and inspiration with you. I'm going to start with Narineh Mirzaeian. Narineh is the founder and principal of MN Office, a design practice based in Los Angeles and Yerevan, engaged in the production of speculative and built projects that study and cultivate works of cultural, spatial, material interest. She is a 2016-17 Fulbright Scholar, and her design work has garnered various accolades, including 2 AIA Design Excellence Awards and the 2006 PA Award Grand Prize. Prior to establishing MN Office, she was an architectural associate at Gehry Partners, so she had worked with Frank Gehry for 9 years, where she played a key role on numerous architectural projects completed and under construction internationally. Narineh completed her bachelor's at the University of Southern California and her master's degree here at UCLA. So she's an alumni from AUD, where she was part of the award-winning team behind the third installment of the LA Now publication series, a publication which was led by Tom Main and Morphosis. She has taught design courses at the Southern California Institute of Architecture, Woodbury University, and her work has been published in Progressive Architecture, GA, Architectural Record, Interior Design, and Metropolis Magazine. Welcome, Narineh. And we have a second speaker today, which I'm very excited to introduce. We have Neil Denari today here, who is a principal of NMDA and Neil Denari Architects, Inc., and a professor at UCLA Architecture and Urban Design Department here. Among his many awards is the Los Angeles AIA Gold Medal, received in 2011. His work has been included in many exhibitions, including solo shows, The Artless Drawing in 2010 at Ace Gallery LA, and Aperiodic City at T-Space in 2017 in Rhinebeck, New York. His work is permanently held by 8 major museums around the world. With his practice, Neil Denari works on building projects in North America, Europe, and Asia. In 2012, he won the first prize in the new Keelang Harbor Service Building Competition. He lectures worldwide and has been a visiting critic at Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Rice, UC Berkeley, among other schools, and was the director of SIAC from 1997 to 2002. He is the author of Interrupted Projections from 1996, Gyroscopic Horizons from 1999, Chromatopia from 2015, Tower Complex 2017, and Mass X from 2018. And Neil has been also so kind to speak almost every year to our summer program students. So a special thank you for again being here and sharing your work. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Julia. Let's see, can everybody hear okay back there? Welcome. Such a big crowd. That's fantastic. And many online. I don't think I've seen a group this big, so that's fantastic, and it's great. I think buried inside this lecture is a question to you. Why do you want to become an architect? Or why are you interested in architecture? Some of you may have said, I've made a commitment. This is what I want to do with my life. For others, it might just be, what is this about? What kind of life is this? I see buildings. How do they get made? Would I be interested in doing that? And I ask myself those same questions as you did a long time ago. The title of the talk, Architectural Change, is related to this term, which we all know. Maybe you haven't heard the term architectural change per se. I don't claim to have coined it, but it references climate change. And over the last 5-6 years, if I ask someone, why do you want to be an architect? Implicit in the answer might be, I'd like to help save the world. Not, I'd like to be an artist, or I'd like to express myself in this medium. Things have changed. Things have obviously shifted. Maybe you're asking yourself that. What can you do? And if you're a liberal-minded person, you might be thinking that you could be a part of designing the built landscape, which of course affects and deeply connects to the idea of climate change. Policy, of course, is just as big. So when we think about architectural change, we think about how do we deal with resources, because we do, at least in the initial thought, and especially from ideas coming from a different place, architects destroy before they make something good, right? You take resources, you transform them, and you make something new, or you decide not to design it all or build it all. But when we're commissioned to do a building, we're already in a kind of negative dialectic, a negative condition. We're gonna take resources and do something with them. And we have to make good on the promise that that transformation will be better than what was there before. That's the kind of ethic of architecture. Of course, it's also about how to do that. While conversations about the environment have gone on long before most of you were born, especially post-war, questions about how to conserve resources and understand how politics intersect disciplines is, I would say, a big part of what goes on in school now. And I wouldn't say that climate change has arrested the discourse at architecture school or has taken the place of everything that used to go on. But in the last 10 years, it's heightened to an incredible limit where something like philosophy or theory might be much more suppressed, and ideas about art, aesthetics, theory, philosophy, things that you may have some tangential understanding of, but on the other hand, when you look at a building, you just look at it as a material thing. That's where we're at too, looking at it as a kind of material thing. And while alternative materials like old materials, even adobe or straw bale or rammed earth, things that have history behind it in terms of sustainability, or odd things, like hempcrete and so forth. If you set out to do a building today, especially a bigger building, oh, that's my water there. Thank you, Yulia. If you set out to do a building today, even the scale of a house, but certainly if it's a larger building, you can't either by code or by the force of nature build a building of any substantial size yet out of those alternative materials. And you choose one of these three main materials to build a building with: concrete, steel, masonry. That's what we have. And of course, the debate right now is whether or not concrete, and there's research being done on the campus here, can it perform better than it has historically in terms of carbon sequestration which, at least in terms of both real research and also a certain amount of advertising, has suggested that wood in the form of mass timber construction lasts longer, is more sustainable, treats the planet better than concrete. And steel, boy, you can see the origins of steel here in this moment of forging in a blast furnace, and where concrete comes from and how forestation works. Once you go back to resources and raw materials, to be an architect is to confront this kind of transformation, which has destruction partly built into it. Okay, so how to replant a forest, how to make steel green, to impregnate it with new additives and materials, even though you can't build a building unless it's got the molecular structure of something like steel. So these are the questions that we ask ourselves when we think about architectural change. And being responsible and saying, look, I need to make my part, is part of just the consciousness raising, I want to help. And then there's the question of what to do, what to accept. Do I do a commission in China? Do I do a commission in Saudi Arabia? For me personally, no, I wouldn't. But would I, do a project that's also not engaged in the highest level of sustainability? That's a question that every architect is facing. I'm going to show you two projects. They're two different projects in terms of scale, size, and location, and also, let's say, in visual impression. And the first project is called the Proof House. It's not the name of the family, it's the name of the idea of the house, which was, in the end, it didn't start this way, but in the end, the house has to be fireproof. The Tascadero, I'll show you where it is. It has to be flood-proof. It has to be heat-proof and burglar-proof. Otherwise, don't build it. If you can't meet that, then we shouldn't put it into the world. Let's say that's the conversation I've had with my clients, although it didn't start out that way. Atascadero is up north from here about 3.5 hours. It's a city. There's the outline. It's off the 101 freeway. You can also see that it transitions between a low-lying, much hotter valley and transitioning into a moderately green pass into a drier section of California out to the coast. On an average day, on a hot average day in the summer, these are what the temperatures are. 2 years ago, when I first visited the site, it was 111 in Atascadero and about 95 at the site, which is slightly uphill. And you can see that there's a 10-degree difference nominally between, quote, downtown and in the site. And I've driven from Atascadero down to Morro Beach a number of times, and it takes about 30 minutes to do that on a winding road, and the temperature drops 40 degrees. And so it just makes you think about all the microclimates that we have in California. It's astounding. This is 2 days ago on the Watch Duty app. It's alarming. So you want to be an architect because you want to help save the world? Not entirely. Architects can't help but engage in this as subject matter, as real conditions. And so the question, if you're an architect like me who's practiced, in some ways, although I work in the commercial world, in an uncommercial way, how would one take these as opportunities to do two things? One, see what you get out of the process of designing, and number two, investigate your own questions and ethics relative to design. The couple that I'm doing this for, they inherited this piece of land. They're Californians from many generations back. It's a site on the one hand that has been unbuilt and neglected for a long time. They're about my age, mid-60s, and wondering whether or not they should not move here, because this is just a weekend house, but to try to escape Los Angeles from time to time. And of course, escaping to a place which is nominally hotter than Los Angeles isn't the ideal thing to do. So if we were to do this project, it had to take on this kind of proof logic. There's the view. Amazing view. It's a somewhat inhospitable site that has to be remade and rebuilt or cleared for the most part when we take the project on. The project is, I'll show you, it's the third scheme, and I'll show you an image of the first couple of schemes. And it tells the story of this design relative to change, both internal change for me, not paradigmatically, but just in this one project from X to Y. And a lot of this, of course, had to do with the conditions of what not only the questions of the environmental response, but also conditions like money, budgets, timeframes, and that sort of thing. It's a concrete house. It's a precast concrete house. It's a very, very simple volume, and what you see is what you get in many ways. There's a plan. We don't have a laser pointer, but it's nominally 24 feet square. It's slightly off square. You can see the dotted lines that go over the plan. Those are 4 foot wide by 35 foot long precast concrete hollow core deck elements, which I didn't design. They're based on a factory element that give you a scale of the project. So it's about a 10-foot cantilever on this roof. Each one of the walls is an independent precast form with punched windows in it that are all the same. And the project as a building is very, very much a response to finally discussions, even after a couple of years, of why do this project? We want to have a lifestyle that would engage in this. We have a certain amount of luxury to be able to do that. The conversation about doing this, because they're not so wealthy that they could buy a site on the coast and build a fancy house. It's in some ways, it speaks to California's question of wealth and status, which is they're certainly well-to-do, but not absurdly or obscenely so, shall we say. So there's the project, and I don't have construction sequence renderings for you, but let's just paint the picture here. The site is cleared so that essentially it becomes a fire break, and we don't want to have any trees or brush nearby. So it's essentially like making a Zen garden, and the house is like the biggest rock in the Zen garden. There's little other rocks. There's not too much to read into it poetically. So the plinth is cast in place, the base, that's the bottom of the building. There are 2 concrete columns on either side of the big opening that are also cast in place. Cast in place means you build it on the site. Then the rest of it is essentially 10 pieces of concrete, a precast beam, 3 precast walls, and 6 precast roof planks that would be assembled in one day and all prefabricated off the site. Okay, here was scheme 1. Before the hardest core criteria about how resistant and how resilient can the house be. And this is a steel and wood, mostly wood frame and stucco project using more or less conventional kinds of systems that you would build a house in Los Angeles. Still modest, it's about 900 square feet. It's 1 room with a kitchen, more or less programmatically the same thing here. I should point that out. So there's the bathroom. There's a small office and storage, and the kitchen. Number 3 is the folding bed. So it's a Murphy bed. They fold up the dining table into it. It's a standard micro loft design element. The rest of it's just a space for them to hang out in. And then the terrace around is for, viewing, et cetera. And you can also see the steel shutters on the windows. Now, if I compare that project to this project, ooh, this one's cooler. Much cooler looking, more like me. If you examine the past 20 years of my work, you go, these are his colors. These are manipulation of his forms. And that one is not. Who did that? I don't know who did that. Now, I'm still of the generation where it matters who did what. Now, that's either boomer ego or boomer ambition, or I haven't quite gotten to the part of, selflessness, but it's interesting. This one is a transition moment where I wanted a certain amount of exoticness in the precast system. It's a hexagonal house. Doesn't really work as well. And essentially at the end, while we transitioned from the first scheme into the proof house scheme, making it in precast concrete for fireproof capabilities, this became the ultimate and direct expression because it is affordable for them. It also speaks to the logic of construction that we would want to have on the site, which is as little as possible. So it is a what you see is what you get, except that when you look at the elevations, these are just regular aluminum sliding windows. They're reasonably good size. These are silver painted steel shutters because the burglar proof is shut it, lock it, put the rolling door down and walk away from it. And it's coyote proof, burglar proof, et cetera. And because they don't Airbnb it. And you open them up, and along with the super graphics, which I'm responsible for, as well as the way in which shadows produce graphic design. And that's why I love renderings like this that engage in shadow. There's an ideology about shadows in drawings. I don't want them, or I want to diffuse. I want to design with shadows. I want to paint with shadows because A, they're real, but they're also incredibly vital. Now, I want to just say that the relief in the facade is very much a direct homage to Le Corbusier, and I was able to visit many of his buildings last year, and not unfamiliar with any of them, of course, but being able to see many of them firsthand. This is a housing project in France, and you can almost imagine that this little house is just one little straightforward unit in the idea of a larger aggregation of units. There's not really much else to say except that it's probably the highest level of engineering that needs to go into this, and also the kind of resolution of all of the components of making it resilient, essentially give it the design. Now, I've tweaked the way in which the shutters connect to the windows, and there are small details in there. Of course, there's the graphic design, et cetera, that brings some smaller, finer thumbprint into the project. The other thing about renderings that I like to do is to try to simulate as much of the real conditions that a building will enter into. That means having some skill at the rendering level. And the fog, of course, maybe you've even seen it in the morning, can roll in, and it makes us ask questions about how the color qualities, contrast, et cetera, change in these different kinds of conditions. Here you see that column is a cast in place column. Then it's a precast beam, not in sequence. There's one of the precast walls. The windows are brought in separate after they're on site. And you can see the overhead door. You can pull that down, shut the shutters, lock it up, and walk away as if it was a kind of storage box. Inside, it's a pretty Spartan environment, except we want to have a certain amount of vitality and color. This is a repeat client for me, and we've shared a lot of the same aesthetic values and agendas, which makes this quite fun. And the view outside. Okay, this is the most recent completed project that my office has done. It was finished about 6 months ago. It's in Beverly Hills. It's a 30,000 square foot spec office building. A spec office building is a piece of real estate. A client comes to you and said, let's develop a site. You have the program, the budget, the zoning envelope, and a spec office building is you build floor plate and then you seek out tenants. It's part of the economic machine. The not so dirty secret is developers build cities, not artists, not politicians. There's only one stadium. There's only one city hall. There are only a few libraries. There are millions of office buildings. There's millions of housing projects, and they're all in our capitalist system based on return. And I've engaged in that for a long time because I said that I'd like to help build the city rather than sit on the sidelines and wait for, let's say, singular sublime commissions. And it's been both rewarding and challenging at the same time. Okay, so this is a LEED platinum building. This is probably the most sustainable building you could build today, with both passive but mostly integrated hardware technology, which essentially is like a scorecard that allows you to essentially produce a building which has a longer life cycle system. So how the glass works, how even during construction, how waste materials are transported away from the site and so forth. So this is the highest rated sustainable project that you could make. And looking at it, you wouldn't know it. The previous house, based on what I said, looking at it going, I see exactly what's going on. That's not going to burn in a fire. It's lifted up on a plinth. It's not going to flood. You close it all down. The coyotes can't get in. The walls, by the way, on that house are 8 inches thick. There are 3 layers, three layers of material, a 3-inch concrete layer, 3 inches of foam insulation, and 2 inches of concrete. That's one of the most highest performing walls you could build anywhere in terms of thermal resistance. So it's pretty much heat proof too, and with a 10-foot overhang protecting the glass. This one, I can't see that. So the question of aesthetics relative to architectural change are sort of interesting in that regard. Our clients asked us to make a project that would be, at this level of LEED rating. So I'll show you the solar panels. There's an underground heat system, cistern for water retention. The glazing is super high performance glazing. There's still glazing that faces south because of the requirements of building. So what I'll choose to talk about after I've said what it is and said what it isn't, or said what it looks like versus what it doesn't look like, I'll just tell you a bit more about the project. It's in Beverly Hills. The triangle there is downtown. It's just off the periphery of downtown. It's on Wilshire Boulevard, possibly along with Sunset, the most famous street in Los Angeles. And it's a street also where there's commercial, it's a main commercial thoroughfare. On either side, it falls back into 1- and 2-story residential fabric. And the other thing about the street, especially within this zone, is from the 1930s to the 1990s and 2000s, there's 1 million office buildings, like a parade of styles for every decade. They were doing this then, architects were doing this then, that's it. because the office building is an empty program. In other words, it's not a library, it's not a house. It has to take up the site, it has to do its job, it's got to let light in. It's very banal at that level. So architects are left to express something about the time. It's a concrete moment frame building. Moment frame means that the concrete members are sufficiently deep enough where you don't have to have diagonal members to resist the lateral loads. In other words, that they stand up in earthquakes. There's access to the parking in the back off the side street. The lobby is incredibly minimal. All it is 2 stairs and a toilet core, and otherwise it's just an open piece of real estate. Now, with an incredibly wide lens, we can make this kind of image. And you can see at some level, though I've painted the picture of it being an empty programmatic project, there's still something projected at a level of sensibility, at a level of impression. In fact, if you do a building in the city, unlike a Atascadero, it's a public building. It's a public building to the extent that the public interfaces with it, even if you don't enter into it, even if you don't have business there, even if you don't own it. These are some details. So the image on the left gives you a little bit of an example, actually both images, of what's going on. There's a 6-story storage building next door, and my job was to try to liberate, to move as much of the floor area of the building as possible away from the party wall, because obviously there's no light coming in to that point. We are on a corner, there are 3 facades that are open, and so through some magic of shifting the area around, because we have a box that we have to work within, a zoning envelope, shifting it around so that we can get 10-foot cantilevers on the one hand and a 10-foot soffit for the entrance to be able to liberate the top 3 floors of the building away from the building next door. So while it's a party wall building on the ground floor, as you see, it's really an independent building that kind of detaches itself and floats, as it were, away from the fabric. So in this particular case, while we know that the infrastructure of the building, like PV panels, et cetera, are going to be in there, we're not telling a story visually about that. What we're telling a story visually is about the history of design on Wilshire Boulevard. And in this particular case, I tried to produce the greatest amount of difference between everything else. You do that, I'm going to do this, and believe in it, even though it's also a very conventional building at the same time. There's not another purple building on Wilshire. So we began at least with that. And then aspects of the details and the design and even the form of art, while it's got its modernist premise underneath it, at a sensibility level, I'm really trying to, I would say, make it my project that I've worked on for a long, long time. There's the raw space looking to the north. And we spent as much time designing the building on the alley, not even on the main boulevard. There you can see all the junk in the background and so forth, just to try to understand it relative to it being an object within the city. And people use alleys quite a bit in Los Angeles to get around main boulevard traffic. And so we were quite concerned about that. And you can see the kind of eroding and stepping of the building to allow the terrace to move all the way through the site. There's the drone view of the photovoltaics. We can build more photovoltaics on the roof in the future as well to expand its capacity. And on the top floor, this is an event space, and you see this 4th floor transitions from concrete to steel because my idea was to do this floating cantilever, and to float something like 20 feet, you're not going to use concrete to do it because it's too heavy and not efficient. You're going to use steel to do that. And so we transitioned to steel up above and some of the views of the project. and the green wall, which is not random. This is actually designed by a botanical artist who we collaborated with, even to develop the coloration of the plant material to connect to the color of the buildings. So to summarize, climate change, we need to help. There's still so many more questions after our consciousness have raised of what to do and how to do it. And also for me, I think projects going forward will become case by case. Sometimes it might be a project that says, who did that? Another project might be, only Neil could have done that. And I think that bandwidth is something that I want to embrace in my idea of change. So thank you very much.
Hi, guys. Well, thanks to the summer crew, to everyone for having us do this. And I'm super excited to be here. I haven't been able to do this for the past couple of years because I was always traveling. And so it's really nice to be here and see everyone and how lively it is here in the summer. I'm also super excited to be here with Neil, colleague, friend, and my mentor, longtime mentor. So tough act to follow, but I'm going to try to follow. So I was just taking a couple of notes in order to kind of maybe at least bookend these talks, because I think we texted a bit about this, but I think they sort of address different angles of how it is we go about making decisions and how it is we go about sort of implementing our work into the world as architects and designers. And so if Neil was sort of setting the scene and addressing with just the two examples that he brought up, the immense challenges and opportunities, in our profession as a kind of outward-looking endeavor in trying to reconcile, meta challenges and meta opportunities. I guess my talk might be a bit more inward-looking or looking in trying to kind of grapple with these challenges and opportunities as a way of cultivating a kind of internal process or of sort of cultivating control mechanisms or consistencies throughout one's life and career as an architect or designer, whether you intend to be a sole practitioner, collaborate with a few people, or be part of an already established office. I think that or I hope that this talk will impart some value to that experience in sharing how we might get to know and understand our own points of view and practice how we collapse the kind of immense amount of information we have to manage, we're tasked with managing as within this profession. So just to kind of keep in mind, because we're going to switch gears. Sure. Okay, so over the course of the last 12 years, as I've been teaching here, I've sort of developed my design practice, but really our design practice with the team at MN Office to kind of incorporate, some of the sort of design, let's say, and research ideas that I've been, incubating and thinking about through different instantiations of my own professional career and then with MN Office as a kind of endeavor. And so today I wanted to share a curated snippets from a few projects and thread them together as explorations of a set of disciplinary interests and maybe some research agenda that are kind of internal to us, but then we hope to sort of output through the work out in the world when we do have an opportunity, rather than talking about any one project in a kind of self-contained or, let's say, linear or chronological lens. So I'll be trying to be a bit chronological, but kind of going back and forth and pulling things in to articulate certain things we've been working on in the office. All right. So I started the office back in 2012 after a stint of 8.5, almost 9 years working at Frank Gehry Partners. And while the practice represents my own unique perspective and the perspective of the team that's been working on the practice together with me. I've certainly brought lots of interests, curiosities, experiences, expertise from sort of previous experiences, professional and just cultivating interests on my own. These images are just there sort of referencing the work that I contributed to at Frank Gehry Partners. These projects are never explicitly referenced in the final output of the work that we produce at MN Office, but they often serve as touchstones and as day-to-day sort of fellow travelers. We look back at them and we try to kind of make sense of some of the work that we do through the lens of revisiting some of these projects as well. I think that's important to acknowledge for this kind of conversation that I want to have today, because we often think that design interventions come sort of out of thin air, and sometimes they do. But in my experience, practicing and also observing others around me that I admire very much, that's not typically the case. So, there's often threads that are kind of that reemerge or are cultivated or are kind of worked on at different instances of a professional life throughout different opportunities. And I kind of wanted to put this out there as a background to what I'll be talking about. I also have to acknowledge the work of artists and art movements, which are things that are kind of impactful for me. I think they're different things for different people. Some people are really sort of delve into histories or sciences or various kinds of other sort of influential lines of thinking, philosophy, as Neil was mentioning. These practices and works have been a long time kind of influence on me and in the way we've been thinking about the work. And I hope to tie that in to some of the things that I'll show, just to kind of, the names of these artists are on there, but these are all artists that are loosely kind of grouped together as the Light and Space movement, which was a movement that sort of that stemmed and developed here in Southern California. So that's a bit of a important thing for me. So with that, kind of landing back at our at MN Office sort of projects. As I was saying, over the course of the last 12 years, which is what the office has, how long the office has been practicing as such, we've been pursuing a set of disciplinary interests that are largely surrounding the productive potential of optical and perceptual phenomena through formal operations. And these are always in the service of trying to transform whatever spatial conditions we have agency to do so. So you'll see a range of projects very quickly. Some are interior environments, some are exterior environments, some are objects, and so on. The resultant works locate themselves across a range of types, scales, and expressions. So speaking more conceptually, they locate themselves through variable readings ranging between flatness and depth, continuity and fragmentation, vacillation and resolution. For the purposes of this talk today, let's identify the flattest possible reading to be akin to an image, and those with the most depth to be expressed through objecthood. In some cases, the projects all share the output is an object derived from or comprised of image, while in others, the image is only legible and consumable as framed by the apparatus of the object. And these are just sort of themes and conditions that we use in the office now, because we've done this a few times, to evaluate some of the work and to correlate it with each other. Obviously, these are not the only themes that we use to collate the work, because as I was mentioning and as Neil spoke in his talk, we have to consolidate a lot of information that is coming to us from sort of external requirements. These are just our kind of internal interests. So the first project I wanted to share, we realized quite a few years ago, but I think it's a good one to kind of thread the past and what has come after, was the headquarters for TeamViewer in Yerevan in Armenia, and it's a kind of institutional commission. It was located in this, largely idle Soviet-era factory in the heart of Yerevan. So although very dilapidated, this building was designated as a historical monument, and was a kind of full-on fabrication factory before the Soviet Union fell. So the project begins, these are final images. As I said, I'm going to be jumping around. The project begins with examining the legibility of the object through moments of flattening, a characteristic that's typically associated with the image. So you see here a kind of chroma that starts to organize the space, and then you see distinctly these scrims that are hung with various kinds of graphics on them and color-coded according to that kind of chroma, and I'll speak more about that as we move on. The oscillation between depth and flatness is carried out through the graphic projection in one case, and then the layering of a textural rustication in the other. Really low-grade videos like this we use a lot in the office because we design primarily through the sort of lens of the 3D model, and then we kind of use these videos to test out and prove to ourselves that the kind of perceptual or the perspectival or the scenographic kind of results that we intend to accomplish are working or not working. Then this object, this is a kind of, these are low-grade images that are tests. Some of these images that I'll share don't ever see the light of day beyond the kind of inner workings of the office. So these images we never shared with the client, but these images were important for us in order to curate the scene and curate the kind of affect and experience of the chroma. So I wanted to tie that project to a project that we did years ago that was an exhibition design and the curation of an exhibition. So this project that I'm showing TeamViewer and the project that I'll show after it both build upon this original kind of exhibition work that we did. And I think that's indicative of like how the practice sort of moves back and forward between work that we've done in the past and work that we hope to do in the future. This was the design and curation of an immersive photography exhibit. The arrayed screens, printed and projected photographs via network tensile structure that you see on the left. And so the kind of array of these arrangements was meant to engender the physical characteristics from the environments that were photographed back into the exhibition space. Obviously, the photographs were quite two-dimensional and flat, but how they were arrayed was meant to conjure up and draw out some of the spatial sort of moments that were captured in the photographs. So in this case, we were literally dealing with image as well as attempting to construct an environment through the array of the imagery. While at TeamViewer, we kind of harnessed some of the lessons learned from that more temporal and let's say having lesser programmatic requirements as a project. But nonetheless, we started to kind of use the array and the organization and obviously the kind of the hanging mechanisms of the scrims to try and project a kind of space between image and object. So ultimately, these various media start to work together formally, tectonically, and materially to adapt to new sets of building criteria. And so for us, this project was a tangible way to engage with the, sort of temporal nature of technology and its role in reconstituting or reusing this kind of a historical, let's say, landmarked building. It bridges well with the next project I'll share because I think at a time when, let's say, advancements in technology engender us to think about new ways of seeing and experiencing the world at a very rapid rate, it seems even more apt to explore how those ways might affect our perception and our spatial perception and use of our sort of physical environments. This next project we completed a few years ago after the TeamViewer project, but it continues a lot of the themes and threads that were sort of cultivated further in that project. This is a children's dental clinic in Camarillo, California. They looked at the potential of optics and its perception as part of the participatory experience to activate the space for a younger user group. Again, with the videos and us trying to kind of simulate how we would make all of the layers that we're designing, the illustrated graphic, the sort of various layers of vinyl, flooring, carpet, lighting, wall build out, all of that snap into focus by animating these 3D moments. So it uses anamorphic projections as well as illustration upon a series of lenticular surfaces. Those are the step surfaces to create layers of visual interest to engage with and for key programmatic functions to organize themselves through. So jumping back to a project we did a number of years ago before this, it was a proposal for a gateway in Little Armenia. We were invited to do this proposal. It was a finalist. We did not get it. You will not see this proposal built. You'll not see this as a gateway. But this project, I think, was kind of the first time that we started working with a lenticular surface, and that theme reemerges and kind of scales and skews quite a bit in our work because a lenticular surface can be a kind of a way to control an optical illusion or an optical perception when it's done so, in photography or in image production, but at a scale of architecture or perhaps environments, it can also start to shape what one sees and experiences, or start to time when one sees and experiences said sort of environments. So back to Sugarbug, the dental clinic. I think the efficacy of that lenticular surface in handling all of the programmatic complexities of the project was one of the key threads for us to jump ahead. We actually started thickening it and programming it, filling it in with some of the operations bays and some of the sort of dental visitation bays. And as you see here in this kind of diptych, the geometry of the irregular stripes took on cues from, in this case, we sort of started referencing the ships in World War I that were camouflaged in order to make their distance not so easily visible to the enemy. So we start to kind of take the stripes and camouflage the space so that once you're walking in the kind of main area, that sort of a distance between an operatory bay and where the public gets to walk becomes obfuscated through the graphic. The illustrated layers of the local flora and fauna brought the project back into the time and place, against these kind of more abstract lines that were doing the work of kind of certain spatial configurations. And the colors and the tones were programmatic wayfinding indicators, as well as a kind of starting to emerge as a kind of brand identity for this particular business. We make really intense drawings that then project all of this work back into them, because the drawings often, like, let's say a Saul Witt, who made his artworks through direction, are the kind of direction for how these things get installed through various trades. So these are some of the examples of that the sort of model becomes the lead in designing and communicating, but then that model also then, the digital model also then flattens into drawings that become kind of construction directions. So the project intention culminates as formal operations that, when commingled, transposed, and translated, have the unique potential to transform a spatial condition that would otherwise be hermetic and potentially not so inviting to its younger constituents. And these are the interior sort of spaces which start to kind of differ as a kind of internal environment than that exterior, much more exuberant zone. So jumping to this is a current project that we're working on, very much in process, but our proposal for this adaptive reuse of a neoclassical building in Yerevan, this project kind of takes the kind of work we've been doing with imagery, graphic, projection, and brings all that work that we've sort of contained into an interior environment to contend with a very overt exterior environment. In fact, lots of historic sort of monuments around and very keen opinions on what should and should not get built. So the perception of the existing is something in this case that would need to be recreated and reimagined after decades of anachronistic alterations, while stretching that image, so while stretching that the imagination of what might be to a kind of holistic singular reading. So you see a series of kind of proposals. The top image is what exists, and then us kind of proposing how to move the project to maybe the central image, which is what the building commission might want us to build. But then the lower image, which is something that we're more interested in experimenting with and kind of trying to make this contextual, but in a way that isn't a sort of overtly or differently so. So the program steps back. So we're actually, trying to manage the massing moves to be quite respectful and reflective of all the historical codes. And then in turn, being quite suggestive and forward with the graphics and the, let's say the moments of the project that are just paint. We keep saying that. We keep saying it's just paint. And it is just paint for now. And to work on this project and to continue to work on this project, we drew on a local material culture. The image is the local civic, sort of one of the civic buildings in the center of the city. And then the historical tradition of constructing through the tufa, which is a local building material there, and how tones of tufa are kind of bracketed to appear as a kind of larger tonal image. So this has gone to very extreme ends, as we kind of typically do iterate quite a bit, and as well as projecting some cultural imagery to develop palettes that might have a place in kind of having a conversation with the original elevation of this neoclassical building. So in some cases, it's gotten very exuberant. These are not sort of our favorites, but the clients become invested now as well. And I think this is the sort of point we've landed at. And at this point, we've settled on the projected color scheme as a tonal kind of affect, bridging between the context, as you see, of the site. And hopefully this is the kind of conversation we can continue to have, which is what we as a group are interested in. We're not interested in it being a kind of outlandish or exuberant building. We're more interested in it being thoughtful and in the sort of adaptive reuse having a notable character to it. Last couple of projects I'll show. This is a competition proposal that we were invited to participate in. It's a large rural site that houses a kind of smart campus for kind of after school as well as summer programs for students of all ages. And this competition, this site boasts very strategic views of some incredibly important landmarks to Armenia and the culture. Mount Ararat, Aragats, and these mountains are iconically very important. So our proposal conceives of a complex of structures that position itself at the kind of highest elevation of the site and start to reflect distinct geological character of this kind of countryside, as well as the vernacular buildings. Some examples of these you're seeing on the lower row, and then thread this with the kind of sort of mythical place these mountains have in the culture through art and film and writing, which you're seeing in the top row. And so in this location, the campus operates both as a viewing device, framing the landmarks. So you're seeing you're seeing how the campus would align with the actual mountain ranges in the background, as well as an architectural artifact that when looked upon from the outside references the silhouetted layers of the two mountains. So I think here, this was an opportunity for the work that we've been doing and thinking about flatness and depth and, how to sort of, use image to project back into a kind of a depth of objecthood. This was a good, speculative moment for us to be able to experiment with that and think about that a bit. So I think that was the pivotal thing this competition served for us. We did not win it, even though we got invited to compete in the sister competition. But and so these are some sections that talk about the kind of ambition of the project as a sort of continuous space that's housed under the roof line. And then, of course, the sort of view looking out to those iconic mountains, which are framed through these varied apertures. And our hope was that, we made the case for a kind of this complex being a kind of mechanism that could frame a kind of different gaze towards the future and not merely the kind of gaze of looking at these mountains through the lens of history. All right, last two. Scalar shift, but I think for us, these smaller projects, in particular this one, which is a duplex, it's an SB9 duplex in Hollywood, so it has an existing home at the top of the through lot, and then this is the proposition for a duplex at the bottom of the through lot. It kind of contains, or let's say explores some of the more expansive interests that I talked about, but in a much more sort of compartmentalized site. So it considers the shaping of this mass, which you're seeing the rooftop, and the sort of goal is to obfuscate it from the home above, which is why you're only seeing the projection of the skylight. And then from the bottom, as you're looking onto it, it houses a series of apertures that try to capture different fragments of the dramatic hillside and the landscape of the site. Kind of going back to an earlier exhibition design, and maybe a side note here, starting out in the office when commissions were hard to come by, we did a lot of exhibition work, and we kind of took that seriously to explore a kind of range of formal and sort of functional material interests. And I think it's been nice and gratifying to have that be able to come back and make some connections to the work that we now are getting. This exhibition in this project, it was designed through a series of strategic diorama boxes that displayed a historical postcard collection. The postcards were physically not displayed, but there were scans and kind of overlays of these postcards that were sort of displayed in these diorama boxes and were backlit. And the kind of shaping of these diorama boxes were reinforcing the various perspectives that we were picking up from the postcards. So essentially they were making a kind of object or a space or an environment for that flattened image to come alive. And so I think in this project, we were kind of trying to do the same thing with the stitching of various apertures. The largest of the apertures, a series of horizontal sliding doors, revealed the main view to the Griffith Observatory across the way, while the narrow horizontal slits high up act as a more contemporary clear story, and sometimes very oddly and in more close-up view kind of focus on the hillside, the dirt, ground cover, trees, and then a long operable skylight at the top at the highest point is sort of tapered to capture views of the sky. And then this efficiently stacked plan makes compounded views. So being able to see through the skylight and then sort of have it fold across the corner and see the hillside or a patch of dirt, it makes that possible because the plan is so compact and so sectional. And in this way, the views that are captured are sort of pieces of the whole picture and must be placed back together by the inhabitants of the duplex. All right, last project. And this is the project that we just started to, we just broke ground on. So this is a project in the wine region in Armenia, and it is a co-op winery. So it is a winery that houses production, but also has a small sort of hospitality wing that will serve and sell wine as well. It's located in a bucolic setting in the mountains of that local region. Our proposal sort of builds on the interests that I've talked about in the office, kind of navigating, between sort of perception, spatial, its sort of manifestation into sort of spatial design and the function of the image and as a kind of viewing apparatus here with constraints of the agricultural industry and embedded in this very particular site, but also with a constraint layer that this would be a pre-engineered building, pre-engineered and somewhat prefabricated, not entirely. So in doing so, the subtle shaping of the mass and its relationship to the material specifications of the wrapper is instrumental as it manages the external reading of the building through graphic and tonal cues from surrounding geological features. So these apertures are also key as they provide a contrary reading from the exterior and indicate breaks in the scale to this kind of monolithic skin that wraps. As I mentioned, this project is conceived of as a pre-engineered building, which means that we were asked to work within a very strict framework of possibilities, sort of kit of parts. The advantages of a pre-engineered building entail keeping costs down, production is pretty streamlined, assembly is more facile. The disadvantages often mean sacrificing design. I'm showing the 4 groupings here. There were many, many more documents, but kind of an abridged version of the 4 groupings of the principles we've had to kind of understand in order to control and manipulate the design to our desired outcome. So just in a nutshell, repetition, obviously, rather than, a repetition of the basic kit of parts, a particular layering of the secondary elements, so such that you can't make apertures everywhere and you can't organize sort of free plan as you wish. You have to kind of work within the rules of the primary and secondary members. And then obviously specific connections that get detailed and prefabbed in a factory before they get shipped out and assembled. I think when we think of pre-engineered buildings, we think of things like this that are just kind of very serial, very sort of the utmost example of efficiency. We were sort of trying to maintain efficiency, maybe sacrifice a certain amount of efficiency and strike a balance between being able to sort of make this as a pre-engineered building, but obviously have particular design elements that would cater to the site as well as what the functions of the building or what we were asked to sort of accommodate. So we have been working through a BIM model with the factory because all of these steel members, as you might imagine now, get are sort of managed through digital means. So if we can build a very detailed model, we can have a very fluid exchange with the factory, and that's the only way to accomplish a kind of more specific design in the face of something, in the face of their sort of specialty being generica. We've also gone back and forth through the digital, through drawings made from the digital model. These drawings are coded specifically to manage the design criteria that we were given and to sort of exert our will for the wrapper and hopefully be a kind of guide, a paint by numbers sort of guide for the installation. We've produced our slew of serial imagery, which we tend to in order to kind of see if we are making decisions about openings and framing views in the way that we're talking, the way that I'm talking about it. And what we ended up with is what like Robert Venturi might call a decorated shed. maybe it takes on the dual identity of being a wine production facility as well as has a hospitality wing. And in coming full circle for this talk, I guess I could say it proposes to be an object that straddles the landscape. So at times sprawling to meet the horizon as a kind of series of continuous objects, arraying into a series of staccatoed objects, or collecting into one singular one, which is, I think, a kind of mid-range study into this obsession we've had with flatness and depth. Thank you.